Virgo. I just want to see, some people had straggling questions or things that they wanted me to address before we go into this segment, and I'm going to put up Michelle's chart from the regression last night again, just to see if we had any questions about that. But was there anything that I was supposed to pick up on before we do that anybody remembers? Good. Okay. That was it. That was your window of opportunity. Okay. So also, again, straggling things, just in case anybody had any thoughts last night from seeing Michelle's regression, or if there's anything that she wants to add from this morning. You know, as you integrated overnight, anything that you wanted to add to your experience?
You know, well, first of all, I did go home and oh, sorry. I'm a mic person and I forgot. Okay, so when I went home last night, I have to tell you my experience. Of course, my dog was really happy to see me, and I just loved on my dog for about an hour and a half. And it was just like, literally, I was so full of love that it was just, I just gave it to my dog. and she was just like, oh, you know, where have you been all day? And so I have to say, as I was sitting there trying to think about, you know, what was coming up, all I could really embrace was my gratitude and my love, you know. And I guess if I was kind of thinking, well, gosh, was my mother in that life? Could that possibly have been Burgess? You know, and that didn't really, but I really didn't want to put any kind of mental thing to it. I just kind of wanted to feel and be, and that's kind of where I was, and I slept like a rock and woke up late. And so, I mean, it was really, what's that?
Everybody else was traumatized.
Oh, gosh, sorry. No, I hope not. But anyway, and then I was just briefly talking to Mark and saying, you know, obviously I have a huge trauma signature here. And so anyway, I'm so very grateful for everyone. Thank you. And Patricia, of course. So thank you. Yeah.
So just to reiterate the signature in her chart and what you saw last night, and this leads so perfectly into exactly the archetypes we're going to talk about today. So we've got the Cancer-Capricorn axis, right? And because it's squared, I didn't even look. I was like, did that work? And because it's squared, this is part of the past life experience as well, even though it's the North Node. So what you saw last night was this signature. This was the story of a child. This is the wounded child, right? The shock and the trauma. We had the first house invaders come in and drag her out. The destruction of the family, right? And you also have Aries, the Aries archetype in the 8th house square the nodes. So again, you have the kind of annihilation of the family, which is where we started with her. On a personal level, if you get into the, again, the 5th house and Capricorn, her Capricorn South node in the 5th house, you know, these are some of the things that we talked about, those blockages to love, right? The heart, the giving and receiving of love. And I'm going to talk to you today about Cancer being the lunar inner child and Leo being the solar inner child. And so she has both signatures, right? What we saw mostly in hers was less of the solar inner child and more of the lunar inner child. Her nurturing needs were not met, and that was what the child was grieving, Capricorn. The child was grieving, and also the Virgo was grieving this, I just want to be loved. That's what she said, right? Let me just say, okay, go ahead.
When she was in the regression, she talked about receiving love from animals, and it was like the only love she could let in was from these animal friends, because she knew they wouldn't betray her.
Exactly.
Every human in her life had, you know, let her down in some way, but the animals...
Conditional love.
Yeah, provided this unconditional love, and I'd like to see where the animals fall in the chart.
Okay, well, here's part of it. Part of it is, you know, if we want to get the general psychology, so what were the messages she got in the spirit world from her spirit guides and masters? Basically, they were saying, you're never alone. This is a double signature of existential aloneness, right? So you have the Aries loner and you have the Virgo, that existential void, right? Somebody said that this morning during, I don't know if it was Mark or Kim's lecture, but somebody picked that out. So you have this existential void. Well, the growth is exactly what the guides were saying to her, right? She was seeing this Yogananda, basically saying, again, this is a kind of rekindling. Seventh house is a rebirth of trust, because trust has been damaged. Pisces, surrender to that which is greater, that which is unconditional, right? Pisces. So that message was all in here. It was the empowerment of that access. So obviously, as a karmic signature, that feeling I always have to do it alone, which is a very Aries phrase, like when my Aries South Node people come in, that's their kind of phrase. That's one of their mantras. Just like Capricorn is, it's all my responsibility. The Aries one is, I always have to do it alone. Taurus does that too, but it's because they're so conditioned. So this is part of her larger soul learning, right? And the animals can reflect that. The animals reflect unconditional love, right? Because, that's what they are. At the same time, if you want to get in traditional rulership, traditional astrology, Saturn's in the 6th house, which is pets and animals, and that's the ruler of the South Node. She went loving her dog, right? and then you did your sadhana. That's what her teacher was telling her last night. Okay, any other thoughts on that before we move on?
You can almost see, can't you, the expression in the group, the North Node Cancer in the 11th, that this is a person. The first house emphasis anyway, but North Node Cancer in the 11th house, they have this experience where they share that kind of process, the emotional body release, in a group, focused in this way. It's actually a North Node resolution issue, isn't it, that she had that experience?
Yeah. Well, what's a beautiful thing is that in shamanism, and what we did, as we explained it, we did talk about this last night in the group, and people had some real lovely insights also about the North Node and the square to the nodes and stuff. And part of the work that we did was a soul retrieval of that inner child, which is part of what I'm going to talk about in Cancer and Leo. And it's essential work to do when people have karmic signatures in Cancer and Leo. There's always either present life inner child soul retrieval and or past life inner child soul retrieval that has to happen. It happens spontaneously. I don't even have to go for it, but that's what always arises. So in Michelle's case, that was essential. And the beautiful thing that happens, and as you pointed out in her signature, in shamanism they say soul retrieval is the most powerful when it's witnessed by the community. Because the whole community welcomes the part back. And there we were, right, welcoming the child back. Okay. So, okay, I'm going to do a reading from the Book of Pat. The word, my Sag is coming out. The word according to Pat. Actually, this is not a reading from me. I just like the poetry that I used at the beginning. This is Walt Whitman, Leaves of Grass. This is for Cancer. There was a child went forth every day, and the first object he looked upon, that object he became. And that object became part of him for the day, or for a certain part of the day, or for many years, or the stretching cycle of years. So what Walt Whitman's talking about here is the impressionability of the child. And this is the essence of the Cancer archetype. This is, within the Cancer archetype, we have the womb, we have the mother. As I said in my own association, I associate this with the lunar inner child, the very early development that comes all the way from the conditioning that happens within the womb, while you're in the womb, and the very early imprinting that happens with mother. Right? The Capricorn axis is, to me, parental father. So he's the one that does the external conditioning. But this very early development is where we take in everything wholesale. There isn't a separation between the infant and the mother in the womb. So what is happening to the mother during your pregnancy is basically reflecting your karma, just as your early childhood reflects your karma as well. The kind of conversations that mother has, the experiences that she has. And I did a whole talk on this at NORWAC. If you guys, it's so critical for our time too, with Pluto in Capricorn, and then just for this little window of time where we have the transiting nodes in Cancer Capricorn. So the keynote that I did at NORWAC was about this window of time that we have right now that's up until, when do they change? April next year, I think. They change, the nodes change, so it's been 18 months. We're right in the middle of it, just about, a little past the middle of this transit. And the kinds of psycho-spiritual issues that have been coming up for people collectively and individually, and that's what that talk was about. So if you see that, I think it was called the Karmic Transits of Our Time. And you can get that from NORAC. But it was all this on this Cancer-Capricorn axis. Yes?
Would you see birth trauma?
I'm sorry?
Would you see birth trauma indicated in that way?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree with the ascendant also showing birth. And I think that archetypally, I tend to look at the ascendant in a broad archetypal sense as that's the first separation from source. Right? You're coming out of Piscean totality, the cosmic womb, into an individuated spark. To me, Cancer is the human womb, right? And I mean, I'm not going to get into Alice Bailey stuff, but they say that all souls are born through the constellation of Cancer. So all souls that enter our solar system come in through the Cancer constellation, which represents that idea we all come in through the womb, right? So the kind of conditioning that happens within Cancer, to me, is imprinting, as opposed to Capricorn, which is conditioning, right? So in the womb, we're imprinted. So, there's a whole body of work on this. It certainly comes up in my work all the time. I do a lot of womb regression. Sometimes it's spontaneous, sometimes it's directed. But what's quite amazing is in the principle of karmic resonance, where we find that, our ancestral karma is the same as our parents' karma, is the same as our karma, is the same. You see these, and also the countries that we're born in, and why we're born in certain socioeconomic karmas. It's all this principle that's called symbolic resonance. And if you start in the womb, you can go out in any direction. So if you start with womb regression and you go into the womb and start, listening what was mother saying and all of those things, it'll jump directly back to. I have cases in the book about it. I'm not going to get into it in this lecture, but I have a case in the book. There's a couple of them about the womb imprints and how they were so literal to the past life, why the soul was re-imprinting all those things within the womb. And how it jumped to other past life experiences. But there, the master of who did that body of work was Stanislav Grof in his holotropic breath, which came out of his LSD research, where he segmented out these, what he called basic perinatal matrices of what happens within the womb experience, and segmented them into, I believe it's 4 segments of archetypal experience. So basically, without getting too complex about it, you can always read any of Grof's stuff. Grof does leave open the possibility of the past life bleeding through in the womb, but it isn't his primary. Gosh, I wish I remember, because I talked about it at NORWAC and I didn't write it down, but I do believe that Grof had a stellium in Cancer, in Capricorn, in the 4th house or something, and his whole life's work was about the imprinting that happens in the womb. It's like, you can't get more literal than that. So, in Cancer, these are the realms that we're working with. So when it comes up in past life experiences, of course, that translates literally. We were all children in our past lives, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where the wounding or the trauma imprinted. But when you have a Cancer signature, be it either 4th house, Cancer, the moon, involved in the karmic axis, you're going to find that the trauma did happen in childhood, in past lives. And so it's necessary to go back and work with those wounded child selves, because they will be reflected in the current life. So it's not only your own past life childhoods, but it's also any experience around birthing, mothering, mother-child, right? And oftentimes we find in souls' histories that if, for example, you're constellated around the Cancer archetype, that you've had experiences and woundings on all sides of those, right? So you've been the abandoned child, and then you've been the mother that abandoned the children, and then you've been, you know, it's all sides of that, because to me, mature souls experiment, this is what Jung talked about, polarity of opposites. When you get into certain mature states, if you want to call it that, of evolution, the soul has experimented with so many different facets of the same archetype, because that is what it's trying to do. It's trying to experience all the different facets. Somebody said something before about the perpetrator-victim complex, right? And that's what I was saying. It's simply a complex. There isn't a value judgment on either side of it, right? It's simply a soul experiment, and the way it imprints in our psyche is as a complex. So, in this chart, we have pretty clear Cancer signatures. Gee, can anybody pick out the Cancer karmic signature in this chart? So we have a moon conjunct the south node, right, a Scorpio south node, in the 4th house. Sorry?
I was just going to say the nodal axis sun-moon.
Yeah, the sun-moon, it's squared by the archetype of Cancer as well, the nodes, right? Jupiter here, squaring this out. So it's a pretty powerful Cancer signature, Cancer Capricorn signature. This woman came to me because, and for fertility issues, and this picks up a little bit where we left off in 2nd house in Taurus. So we have a double signature of fertility. It's the womb and it's the conceiving, right? So you have Taurus and Cancer in the karmic axis. She came to me for fertility issues. She had been doing in vitro fertilization with no success. So she had had a tubal ligation pregnancy early on. I guess a pregnancy attaches within the tube, and she had to have that removed. But they said she would still be able to conceive if the egg was implanted, but it couldn't. She didn't have fallopian tubes, I believe. So she had to do in vitro. Well, in vitro is really expensive. It's something like $10,000, $15,000 a pop, and she had done it twice and to no avail. So before she was and her and her husband really wanted one. They really wanted a child. And so when she came to me, you know, of course I explored those psychological issues of, is there something in the marriage or the relationship that might stop some incoming soul from being with them? Because, you know, you have to explore that. And there wasn't. There really didn't seem to be. It seemed to be a clear, somatic, right, karmic issue with womb and fertility, and that's kind of in the chart there anyway. So one past life that we did was a death and childbirth, and need I say more? I mean, again, this stuff is, like we say, you can't make this stuff up. It's pretty literal. Yes?
Can you speak to the moon in Scorpio by itself, not conjunct the south node there?
Why would I do that? Can I? But why would I do that?
Is there anything significant about it?
Anything significant about in this chart?
Yes.
Well, yeah. I mean, I would say as it relates to her karmic attitude that she's bringing into this life, giving life to a child means death. Giving birth to a child means death. To her, that was the imprint. She's blocked. Right? I mean, she died in childbirth, and she imprinted something about birthing means death, right? Life and Scorpio's life and death scenarios, right? And it's all constellated around the womb and childbirthing. So that was just one layer of it, was working with that past life. And then we worked with, actually I'm telling them out of order, but I can recap that. The first life that I worked with her was, she was a tribal woman picking up on Africa and lions and all of that stuff, I make two archetypal associations. It's not geodetic equivalent, but archetypal associations with Africa always show up for me in the past life work in Cancer and Leo. And Cancer, they show up in Cancer because Africa is the birthplace, the mother, the homeland of humanity. And Leo is, of course, the kind of the sun and the lion and all of that. But it's also the pride and dignity of the African people. They're very Leonian, right? So I see that often show up, and it correlates in people's past lives when they have that signature. Quite frequently, they have African past lives. So she was an African woman in a tribe, and it wasn't a really elaborate, long story. She was about 4 months pregnant, and a neighboring tribe invaded them and captured her, and they wanted to use this growing fetus for some ritual magic purposes, Scorpio Taurus, and they captured her, brought her to their tribe, and it really happened so fast, and we're kind of talking the levels of shock because it did happen very fast. I was just looking to see if I had that. No. They captured her. They brought her to a fire, cut her open, took out the baby, did whatever ritual thing they did, and threw the baby on the fire. So she was still alive when she saw this happen, but died. They just basically, it was like, used parts pretty much. They just cut her, took it out, left her there to die, did what they needed to do with the infant, the fetus, and then threw it in the fire. And so she watched this, and the thing was she was horrified by the fire, obviously in shock and trauma and just kind of staring. So again, as you know from seeing the regression last night and what I talked about, how these parts of us get stuck in these bardos, that's where that part of her soul was, just kind of staring into the fire, horrified, watching the child burn. So when I worked with her in the afterlife, I asked some African mothers to come in, some tribal women that she might have known from that life earlier. And they came in, it was really quite beautiful, they came in carrying the spirit of the child, right? Like and the child was very radiant, and it was very like, I wanted you to be my mother. I think there were some stories between them about times that they had not been able to be together, and again, you have that separation, Scorpio, loss of each other, right? The moon, again, moon in Scorpio could also be loss. They've been unable to complete, right, being together as mother and child, and the child was basically saying, I'll come back to you. So the spirit of this child was saying to her, so this was, what's funny about this is she was this really white-bread Westport, I live in Fairfield County at the time, Westport woman, it's where Martha Stewart and Paul Newman live, right, very like white bread. And these African spirits are saying to her, we will help you heal this. We will help you to facilitate the birth of this child. Honor us because we're your ancestors. It's basically what they were saying. We're your spiritual ancestors. Honor us through drumming, and we will help you conceive this child. So afterwards, I told her, well, I know of some drumming circles, And I said, will you really do that? Will you honor what these spirits said to you? And she said, yes, I will. And she went to some drumming circles, and she did the in vitro, and it took. And the baby came in. I know, it was really quite beautiful. So that was a completion. So again, when you look to the North Node, it's almost like there was something about her needing to make this conscious effort. And she and her husband did prove, basically, as her North Node in the 10th house is showing, they proved, we really want this child. We're responsible. We're really stepping up, and we really want that. So I think they had already taken those actions, So it was go ahead.
There's Jupiter in the 12th house, and obviously it's a skip step integrating via the North Node, but 12th house Jupiter in Cancer, the African spirits, the faith, the secret clan in the 12th house, the Jupiter principle, people are sometimes watched over, or I
have Jupiter in Pisces in the 12th, and I can't tell you how many times that guardian angel pulled me right out at the last second. I mean, it's like grace in action. Yeah, and so that is definitely that. That's like, to me, that's a grace signature too. Yeah. Yeah, and like you said, the grandmothers, because it was the African grandmothers that came, and they're like, we're your ancestors. And, that's another thing. On both Cancer and Capricorn, I see ancestry. right? And I see the influence of ancestry. And I think in Cancer, you get it again through the womb, right? The ancestral spirits are already active. You know, don't they say that the egg of the female, they're all fully formed while you're in the womb of your mother. So it's all your lineage is coming through. It's already there. It's already decided, right? And the male brings that spark, whatever he brings. It's all already there, you know, whatever he does. I don't know. Some insignificant little thing. Yeah, I know. Hey, yeah. We're sick of this patriarchal bullshit. I mean, let's call a spade, okay?
But we don't want any complexes here, gentlemen, because in past lives, you were women, we were men, so no blame, no shame.
Right. And we're talking about gender switching, right? Cancer Capricorns, what Kim Marie was talking about this morning. So in I forgot where I was. In Cancer, it's the spirit lineage, you know, that's coming through, and so the ancestors are imprinting in that way. In Capricorn, it's like the tradition, you know. So you get the ancestral traditions, and those are the things that are archetypally. I'm not going to say that it's literal because it often isn't literal, but archetypally brought through the father archetype. Right? You know, he's the one that teaches you how to be. The mother teaches you the inner world. Cancer, the emotional, the inner world. The father teaches you the outer world. When you start to come of age and you start to come out into the world, father shows you how society works, how to be a citizen, what are the traditions, the structures, the rules. Right? He's the model of that. So, to me, I get ancestry on both of them. Okay. So basically, that's all I have for her. Certainly with Pluto in Cancer, or Pluto in the 4th house, or the South Node in Cancer, or part of any of the karmic signature, you know, again, it's those nurturing needs that haven't been met in past lives. So they can come in, they can be displaced, they can come in and have either shut down their emotional needs, or they can be overly needy. And I've had both kinds. Our reaction to trauma, you know, you can't ever say this is the way that this particular traumatic reaction, somebody reacts to a particular trauma. Some people will react and deny that they have needs, and some people will just be overly clingy and needy. I have another Cancer chart that I can put up. This one doesn't have an overt Cancer signature, except that Pluto's in the 4th house. And Saturn conjuncts, right? But it's not like you have a really overt Cancer signature. And I like these charts. Yeah, I'm talking karmically, though. Again, I mean, the cool thing about, you don't even have to look. I mean, for me, I have this X-ray thing. I just go Pluto in the notes. That's all I need to know. You know, I mean, certainly there's more when we get into the rulers and so on and so forth. But that's what I remember everybody as. I wouldn't know your sun sign, forget it. I'll remember your Pluto in your notes, though. So, you know, you don't need to go too far to look into what are the complexes. So, in her case, let me see, I've got about several of her past lives. I have to see which ones I want to start with. So I'm not going to get into her Libran stuff because Pluto's in Libra and Saturn's in Libra, and so there's a whole bunch of that stuff in there that would actually be more suitable for the Libra talk. But let's just suffice to say a lot of displaced emotions, codependent relationships, okay? And that's kind of part of her karmic history and what was playing out in her life as well. And one of those cases, this is one of the cases in my book also, and that case is in there. Yeah, she's a daughter of a friend of mine, and we were having a party, and one day she sat down with her chart and just said to me, it's the first time I'd seen her chart, and she said, well, what do you see? And I mean, you know, don't you love when people do that? Well, tell me, what do you see? It's like, I'm at a party, okay. I don't know. So I looked down at it, and of course, again, I just went right to Pluto, and I said, there was a little old lady who lived in a shoe, had so many kids, didn't know what to do, right? Saturn conjunct Pluto in the 4th house. Well, years later, when I regressed her, guess where she went? One of her past lives, she was a pioneer woman, Sagittarius South Node, kind of setting off into the Great West with her husband, who was a whirlwind romance, Jupiter, ruler of the South Node in the 5th. It was a whirlwind romance. She wanted a bigger, wider horizon. She left her family and went off with this man out into the Wild West to stake their claim on some land. It was all full of Libran promises and Leo romance, right? You know, he promised her this, and so she went with all of that, right? It was the fantasy romance. And so she went with him, and of course, once they get out there, it's a little different reality. Things were fine for a while. They homesteaded, they set up their property, blah, blah, blah. She had like 3 kids, 4 kids, 5 kids, I don't remember. It was like they just kept coming out. And then he became an alcoholic. Saturn conjunct the South Node. Neptune conjunct the South Node. He became an alcoholic and quite Sagittarian himself, you know, screwing around, right, whatever. You know, yeah, see, she's Sag man. and so, you know, she was left with the kids, and on one of his drunken outings, he got killed in an accident, and he never came back. So here she is, and I've had this story in many different variations with people. Trust me, pioneer lives are no fun, right? And a lot of times the women that follow their men out there, they go crazy. Because the isolation, it's insane, the stuff that happened out there. And so that's pretty much what happened with her. There's no man, you're out on the frontier, you've got 3 or 4 kids, you know. You had one of those? Yeah.
Yeah, you regressed it.
Oh, right? And so here she is. So what happens is she starts to fall into a Saturnian depression. And her older daughter at the time kind of starts taking over and raising the children. And then there's all this resentment. The older daughter hates her for doing this, but then the hate of the daughter and the guilt and all that stuff builds up. It's all this kind of, you know, Saturnian stuff, and also the South Node's in the 6th house, so there's guilt and all the anxiety and all that. She didn't have a nervous breakdown. I've had a lot of pioneer women that had nervous. I did one myself where I had a psychotic snap. Was a pioneer woman. Had complete nervous breakdown. She didn't do that, but she just sunk into a depression, and she ended up dying and abandoning the children. In her mind, she abandoned the children. And so part of the resolution of that, we had to work that through with the daughter, and there was a lot of resentment in the spirit world. It wasn't one of those warm, fuzzy bardos. She didn't go to a war, you know, they kind of, the spirit of the daughter of that life was very angry at her, and so they kind of had to have it out in the bardo, and it was about this kind of separating out responsibility, right, for mothering and child rearing and so on and so forth. So that was one story that I worked with her. The other one, the second time, or it's not really the second time I worked with her, but the second one I'm going to talk about, she came to me at a point in her life when she was pretty much near a mental breakdown. And what was precipitating it was she you know, you can see she's a young person, obviously, Pluto Libra. When I worked with her, she was only in her mid-20s. Or early 20s, and she had already worked with children in Guatemala with AIDS. And this is, trust me, if you've abandoned children in the past, you're going to be trying to save them in this lifetime. I can't tell you, I literally had a woman who was a priest who sacrificed babies in the past who worked for Save the Children in this life, right? There's a little bit of atonement there. So she's, of course, in this life now working with children, and so she worked in Guatemala with AIDS children, and she was also doing some work currently in her hometown with Mexican immigrant children. And it wasn't like the pressures of her job were so intense that they were, she said, I think in her own words, was something like, I just can't meet the responsibilities of my life right now. Right? So there was this emotional overwhelm going on here, right? The Saturn, the Pluto in the 4th house. She was hitting, just this sense of overwhelm. At the time, Uranus was squaring the nodal axis. And that's where we start to get this mental trauma that Mark's been talking about and why she was so close to nervous breakdown. She had had a breakup with with a boyfriend, and, it triggered a lot of this emotional neediness and stuff. But really, externally, if you looked at it, it wasn't. And I kind of thought, honestly, when she came to me, I hope she never watches this, but I honestly thought she was being a bit of a drama queen. I was like, really? Really, we have these thoughts, right? Right? Mark's laughing, right? We know, right? You're like, I think she's being a little bit of a drama queen. I worked with her energetically first before I did regression. I won't get into how I work energetically. When I opened up the energy space and I got into her energy, I realized it was absolutely critical what was going on with her. And it was pretty much like the root chakra that goes below the feet into the ground, where you normally have this really strong Dantian connection, was like a tiny thread. I mean, it was so stretched and it was so fragile. It was like a spider web. And I actually gasped when I got into her energy and saw that, and I was like, wow. I mean, she's really this close to leaving the planet right now. It's that critical. And actually, the way she got into the story was through energy work. I was just doing the energy, and bang, she went right into the story. So I didn't have to do a formal induction. She went into probably, I would say, in timeline, her last life on Earth before this one. She was in South Africa, and she was, again, Africa. And, here you also have to look at this Venus in Leo square Pluto here, too, because that comes up in her next story. She was in Africa, and she was a teacher in a shanty town. Teacher, Scorpio, Sagittarius, Gemini. She was a teacher. I think, we didn't get into her childhood in that life, but I think she was pretty much just a woman on her own. She didn't have extended family. She didn't have whatever, but she had whatever education she needed, and she was teaching. And in the first scene in the past life, some armed soldiers burst in. They were looking for insurgents, and they just opened fire. I mean, it was so, sudden. She's standing in her classroom, and then wham, they come in, and she's screaming, I can't save the children, my babies, I can't save the children. And I just lost it as this woman. It was just horrible. The police arrested her. They didn't kill her. What they did was probably worse than that. They took her out of her community into some distant village where she had no contacts, nobody, and just dropped her on the street. I don't think she really had anybody to go back to anyway, but it's like severing somebody from their community and their roots, and basically brought her to this distant shanty town and just dropped her. And so she was in shock and just wandering around the streets as this woman, like this, very quickly succumbed to illness. She was just eating scraps, it was just, she was living a life, horrible street life, very quickly succumbed to disease and died. She got into the spirit world, and I'm trying to remember, it's in the book. I think that we called in some of the spirits of the children. She could not reconcile the sense of responsibility. She could not. So when that happens, when you get into in my work, when you get into the spirit world and we can't release the complex, it means there's something deeper going on. There's something connected, and we need to go deeper. So I directed her, and I don't remember the induction that I used or what point I jumped off at. We went immediately into another life, and then this time, and here's where this part comes in, she's an infant ready to go under the knife as a child sacrifice. And she's screaming, I want my mommy, I want my mommy. And here we were going in, and really this was the point of her emotional mental breakdown at that point, was we were really hitting her infant terror. I mean, it was absolute infant terror. Now, yes, as the regressee, she could speak. At the time, she was a tiny infant, and she had no verbalization, but this is what that infant was thinking. I want my mommy. And, bang, they sacrificed her, and she was in the spirit world, and instantly in the spirit world, all she heard was the screams of children. So imagine what bardo she went to. She went to the sacrificed baby bardo. It's exactly where she went. And it was still, that's why the African woman was unable to let go of this responsibility for the children, because this part of her own soul was still stuck as an infant, helpless in the I also call it the sacrificed baby bardo. So and she was screaming and saying, I can't, the babies are screaming, and it was just really, I mean, this frantic kind of, so again, we called in the spirit grandmas because they're so good. And we started collecting up the babies and helping and healing, and as we started to clear out the bardo, and she's just like, oh my God, there's hundreds of them and hundreds of them. As we started to do that, she could start to separate herself out. We were then able to work with her infant self. She was so enmeshed in this. And again, you know, I want to say the Libra archetype is also an archetype of enmeshment as much as Pisces is, right? It's an archetype of enmeshment. So she was so enmeshed in this whole collective infant, mother, child, infant, save the children trauma. So I had to separate her out from that. And then, of course, as I said, you know, Uranus was transiting her nodal axis. So we had unnecessary liberation that needed to happen. Now, I wrote this down because the signatures were a little complex. She and her mother, she realized when she was in the spirit world, when we called in the spirit of her mother from that lifetime, that it was her mother in this life. And her mother in that lifetime came and said, I couldn't do anything. It was the beliefs of the time, right? We were confined, Saturn, right, societal expectations of Libra, by the beliefs of the time. I did not want to give you over to that priest. I did not want to do that, and I'm so sorry. Well, the interesting thing was she and her mother in this lifetime have this savior complex together, right? You know, mother's always trying to save her, and I see savior complex, and I'll talk about that later when we get to Sag, as kind of Pisces Sag thing. A lot of times when Sag is in the car, there's always some kind of heroic savior thing going on. So she was doing it in her relationships, mother was doing it to her. In their composite chart, and in fact on the way, this is in the book, she had called her mother that morning, and her mother was racing down from Vermont to help her that evening because she thought she was going to have to hospitalize her because she was about to snap. So mother's doing her heroic thing. Meanwhile, we're working on the karma to try to release the two of them. Their nodal axis in their composite chart was Gemini Sagittarius, and transiting Uranus was squaring the nodes of their composite chart. So while I had her in the bardo, I mean, I didn't know this at the time. I looked at it later, but the urge was there to let's see what we can clean up with present life mother. So we did, and spirit of, you know, they worked with each other through the past life infant and mother. And she said to her mother, I release you from your responsibility to me, right? Which was, again, that was the necessary liberation that needed to happen. Also in the spirit world, and what happened afterwards was she actually left the state where she was living and moved to Hawaii. And the separation from her mother at that time and what she did with her life from that point on was so immensely healing for her. So it was a huge transition for her. So basically, when she was in the spirit world, the guides were there, and, you know, basically I was saying to her, well, you know, you've worked with so many traumatized children, and she's very gifted herself. She's very talented. She's got all that Leo stuff going on. You know, from the time that she was small, she was gifted in arts and painting and drama and all kinds of stuff. And I said to her, you know, you've worked with wounded children for so long. Is there some other way that the spirit guides might say to you about working with children? And they said to her, nurture your creative inner child. That's so Leo Cancer. Nurture your own, this is the spirit guide's words. Like, again, you can't make this stuff up, right? The archetypes are alive within us. Nurture your own creative inner child, and maybe work with that side with children for a while, because you've done so much work with the wounded side. And the part of her that was keeping her trapped with working, and it's not that working with the wounded children is something that's out of her life. It's just that for that time period, she needed to nurture this other part of her so that when she came back to doing that work, there wasn't that enmeshment, that codependent, her own unresolved stuff working out through the environment. 10 minutes for what? Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, before I put that away, any questions on that? Thoughts?
It just seems to me that, I apologize. Satirizing. It seems to me that with the sun in Gemini, Mars conjunct the sun in Gemini, and then a moon in Aries, doesn't really seem to have that maternal vibe to me. You know, that's all.
Well, my question really compounds on that. I mean, pardon my ignorance, but I don't understand why this is a Libra signature. I see this as an Aries signature.
Well, karmically, we're talking karmically, right? He said he doesn't see this as a Libra signature, he sees it as an Aries signature, because you're focusing on the Cancer archetype. But I'm not talking about the moon in her chart. I'm talking about the karmic signature, which is Pluto and Saturn in the 4th house, and how that's been represented in her past lives. Now, why she has an Aries moon in the 10th house is a different discussion, because that's a current life issue, or just a current life manifestation, right? Yes.
With the sun in the 11th, with the karmic signature, that we're a trauma signature because it's this group, right? So she was trying to protect lots of children. It was a community. Her need, and she died in that life where she was taken away from community, which was her only sense of identity.
Yeah.
Because with the moon, or the sun in the 11th, her identity is so interwoven with her sense of community.
Right. Okay. You're very passive today. What's the deal? It's Cancer. We're all just feeling like, I just want a warm milk and some cookies. I don't know. Just kind of want to curl up and, yeah, right. And warm milk. Yeah. Oh, okay. I'm sorry. That's it, right. Thanks, Mark. Oh, where'd he go? Oh, see, he left, right? Want to take checking out, right? Typical Pisces. Yeah. Yes. Kimmery.
Do you want the questions to stay on the nodal axis? I mean, I'm kind of curious just in general when Moon is conjunct the South Node.
In general, it's all those issues. It's everything I was talking about. Yeah, nurturing, mother, child, womb, past life, wounded childhoods. It's all needs, dependency needs. It's the same archetype. Yeah. So, I mean, same signature, same archetype. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I don't necessarily want to jump into Leo right yet, unless, do we want to take a break here, or you want to change tapes here and I can just get to Leo? Dun, 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 dun. How appropriate for Leo, playing games, right? I mean, come on. Okay, another reading from the Book of Pat. Actually, this is... Get away with what? This is, again, just for the quote that I did at the beginning of the chapter. This is Leo, and you all know this quote. You've heard it before. Marianne Williamson. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate, Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure, right? That is the essence of the wounded Leo archetype when we talk about Pluto and Leo and some of the issues that arise when Leo is part of the karmic axis. It has a lot to do with owning our own power, being empowered, being in our gifts, being in our talents, and there's been all kinds of complications in past lives about what that is about. Before we get into that, I just want to mention, because I didn't mention it before, in the handouts that Kim Marie gave you, there's a couple handouts from me. And one of them is a list of keywords of the archetypes, which is just a nice little reference. And then the other one is when archetypes square the nodes by, like when Aries squares the nodes. Passable past life scenarios, because somebody just asked me, sum up what Jupiter square the nodes is. And it's in there. At the same time, in my book, there's a very useful appendix, which is also by archetype, and it shows, like for example, this is Aries, and it shows an empowered form of the archetype by keyword, and then some of the past life complications, right? And that's one way to think of the archetypes from present life to past life expression. When you think of it in the present life, you might think of it in the empowered form, but certainly when you look at an archetype from the past life perspective, you're looking for what went wrong. Right? It's that simple. What went wrong with that archetype? Like, so for example, in Aries, we have the explorer and the pioneer, right? That's a typical Aries thing. What went wrong? Well, pain of aloneness, being invaded, being an invader, right? Being abandoned out there, whatever it was. So there's a whole appendix in the back here with that. So Leo. So I call Leo the solar inner child. And in my book, I have a wonderful story from Leo Biscaglia, appropriately named. Anybody remember him? Yes. He was that pop psychologist from the 70s and 80s. And he was the love guy. He was so Leo, was the guy not perfectly named. And, I tell a little story that Leo Biscaglia talked about, creativity and how our school system just, squashes that. And how there was like a little girl and she wanted to draw this tree, and the teacher said, today we're going to draw a tree. And the little girl's like, yay! Right, and got all the crayons and was all excited, and the teacher draws this kind of lollipop, and the child drew this tree that had purple and black and green and orange, and it was just like all over the place, and it was this, and showed it to the teacher, and the teacher was like, oh, like that's not really a tree. The teacher wanted her to draw her tree. You draw my lollipop tree, that, I don't know about that, right? So it was, what he was illustrating was this kind of where our creativity gets wounded, right? And so to me, the solar inner child, is the part of us that, so now we're out of that Cancerian early conditioning the mother mirroring that goes on, that early environment. And to me, in the Leo archetype, you're stepping out into a wider environment. Now other people's parents become part of your world. And, teachers become part of your world. And there's other people you're modeling with, and it's kind of like preschool and kindergarten. And you're being encouraged to create and finger paint and draw and play and all of those things that are very Leo. So that's Leo in its empowered form. It's that solar inner child. It's the part of us that, finger paints something and brings it home and expects somebody to put a gold star on it and go, that is so great, right? There's a part of us that's like that. And very rarely, and Mark talked about that when he was talking about his Uranus in Leo, very rarely do those parts of us ever get satiated enough or feel that they've had enough recognition. So when Leo is part of the karmic axis, or it's part of the, the past life, what often happens is that our need for recognition, our need for our ability to bring our talents out into the world, our gifts, our very specialness, something's gone wrong with that in the past. So I have one chart that shows that, and I'm just going to do this one really quick. because I want to get to another Leo case which gets into more complex Leo issues. Yeah. So this woman came to me, and we did, this is all just a current life inner child soul retrieval. So just to show you the level of work that I did with her that didn't involve past lives. I did other work with her that involved past lives, but this particular session that I'm going to talk about was just inner child soul retrieval. And we can see that she has Pluto conjunct a Leo North Node in the 4th house. So this follows very nicely on our conversation from the lunar inner child and the solar inner child. She also has the node squared by Scorpio over here, and the sun is the ruler of the North Node. Now, just very quickly, in evolutionary astrology, when Pluto conjuncts the North Node, that means that this is part of the past life experience, and this is the direction that the person is meant to continue to evolve in. Right? So they're meant to continue working here. It also shows that they have been working on issues. So for her, her past life content has been working on also Leo Cancer issues, and she's meant to continue to evolve in that direction. So when we started to do some present life regression, she went into a current life memory where she was, I remember this, she was smiling for a photograph, but she had tears in her eyes. And her father, and she said, I'm standing by this tree, and my father is photographing me, and I'm smiling, but I'm crying at the same time, and he doesn't see it. All he sees is the smile. Right? That's so, it's like she's an actor. You know, she's trying to act the part. Right? It's very Leo. And her needs totally not recognized. You know? And so she's this little girl that's like, she really wants, like, Daddy, don't you see I'm really hurt? And he's just like, smile for the camera, honey. So that's where we started. And from that memory, she heard a voice come in that said, you're nobody special. And all of a sudden she said, oh my God, I forgot. That's what my mother used to say to me all of the time. You're nobody special. And so she said, then we went right there, right into the inner child. Took her right into the soul retrieval of that part of her. And basically the piece of work that happened was, you know, it was her 7-year-old self that came forward. And I would say it was like that part of her the sun part of her, the solar part of her, had retreated behind the clouds. And the cloud that was eclipsing her Leo sun, herself, right? This was that parental interjection. You were nobody special. And that was Mother's voice. And that's what Mother told her. So as we worked with this inner child self, you know, I won't get into the whole process that I did with her, but the essence was getting her to come out from behind that voice and work with that, you know, work with that interjection and so on and so forth. So as we worked with this inner child self, a very interesting spirit animal came. And again, in the category of you can't make this stuff up, I just ask, you know, let's see if there's a spirit animal that wants to come and help you. So as the child was starting to regain her joy, which is Leo, her heart, her sense of self, as she was starting to regain that, I said, let's see if there's a spirit animal that'll come that'll represent, you know, this newfound energy, this newfound child self that you're now welcoming back to yourself. And instantly a peacock showed up. Right? And the peacock was like it was the antidote to the poison that Mother had fed her. You're nobody special. And peacock was basically saying to her, show your colors. Right? You know, fan out your tail, be somebody special. And what was really beautiful was 2 weeks after the session, and we did a lot of work with peacock and integrating peacock and letting that child self feel it's okay to be seen. It's okay to let the specialness, the colors, your unique self come out and strut your stuff a little bit, right? She called me 2 weeks later, and she was a yoga teacher, and she said, you're not going to believe what happened, but she said, one of my students gave me a peacock pin today and said, I'm giving this to you in my appreciation of you as a teacher. She recognized her specialness, right? Again, you know, the universe conspires with our evolution if we work in that direction.
So here we're looking really at the sign more than the house, because the house is the fourth.
Yeah, but her nurturing needs, they're both. They're lunar inner child and solar inner child. With her, it's a double signature.
Oh, it's a double signature.
Yeah.
Because that's what I would think.
Yeah, but this particular inner, because we can have many inner child selves, you know? The child self that was left with daddy, don't you see me? That's the Cancerian self, right? The one that we worked with was the one that was hiding behind mother's, you're nobody special, right? So that was that child self. Questions, comments?
I'm sorry, it doesn't have anything to do with the body trauma right now, but I'm just confused because you've got the part of fortune in the chart, and the part of fortune is conjunct the south node, and that just torques my mind in terms of how that would work with this particular situation. I mean, her greatest joy, or where she gets her greatest joy, is her south
Well,
node.
it's groups, like-minded others,
Okay, so
right? I mean,
being
maybe.
conjunct the south node.
And it's also something about, obviously in her 10th house, it's something about her authority. Oh, I've got some Aquarius past life stories there, but I'm not going to go into them. Because, you know, there's stuff there that involves that moon conjunct the south node in the 10th house that also is part of her karmic history. And the Cancer signature, very wounded child past lives. But we won't go there. In essence, one of them was a Holocaust life. Mass trauma, Aquarius. But as far as the part of fortune, it's going to be her being, let's just say her being able to bring her specialness into a like-minded community. That's a joy, right?
It doesn't bother you that it's conjunct the south node, kind of take her backwards.
I don't, you know, I hadn't really interpreted that in part of the signature. Yeah, I would have to give that one some thought. Okay, so stuff about Leo, you know, like I said, is also about owning your own power. In my book, there's 2 cases in the back which are really quite interesting because they're both about healers coming into their gifts and what they're bringing out into the world. And they have almost the exact same chart. And I regressed both of them separately, and they don't know each other, and they had almost the same past life. So it's really quite interesting. The only thing that shifted was a house. So it was like one of them had a south node in the 6th, and the other one was in the 5th. And that's like the only thing that shifted in the chart. But their past life stories were so similar, but it's a really great case study, a comparison case study to see the difference of how such a similar signature can manifest just with the little house shift. But the essence of both of their stories was about coming into their own power and past lives that they had about owning their power. This story that I have up here, a little complicated. How much time do I have? 45? All right, so I got 15 minutes on this one. I just want to see how much I want to cut this down. It's a complex case. It actually involves spirit possession and a whole bunch of other stuff.
Where's the Leo signature here?
Yeah, I like that. And that's why I put it up. Because she's like, where's the Leo? Show me the Leo. Venus in Leo square the nodes. Yeah, and this is what's so interesting about it, right? Because it is, you know, when you look at it, you're kind of like, where's the beef, right? Where's the Leo? Because Leo wants to be seen, right? And in this story that I'm going to tell you, it's all centered around. I mean, certainly all of this ties in, but his main thing was all centered around his heart. Now, this is a double signature. Because you have Venus ruling the heart chakra and Leo ruling the physical heart, right? So we've got a double heart signature there, okay? And so this is a guy who, you can see he's an older guy. His heart had stopped twice in his life. Once he didn't know about, once came up during regression. He found out it happened earlier in his life when he was young. He didn't know that. But later, he was wearing a pacemaker when he came to see me. So basically, part of what happened to him, let me just see if I can distill this. When he first laid down on the mat, an entity came out. We didn't go to a past life. An entity came out, and we named entity. This is what I do sometimes when we identify them. We give them names, because I'm like, I'm not going to deal with you yet. I have stuff to do with him. I'll get to you later. I don't like them to control my sessions. So this entity came out, and we called him Grinny Toothy Snake. Because when he came out, you know, it was like, he was kind of like hissing, and he was like, and it was right after September 11th, and this energy was very, I mean, it was like the whole room got thick, and it's just like, oh, it was this energy of just, I want to stir things up, and I just want to get in the way, and I just want, it was a very invasive interference. So I was like, thank you for coming, we'll deal with you later. And so I said to him, I asked him in his own imagery, is there some image? And he said, he's like a little snake. There's 2 snakes here, he said. And I may or may not be able to get to explain the whole thing. And we named him Greeny Toothy Snake, because that's what he's like, he's a kind of grinny tooth. I'm like, fine. Okay, so now I want to get to, when we have spirit interference, it's hooked in again. When I talk about karmic resonance, it's hooked in because there's some wound. So again, I could get into doing battle with this entity, and it could be all dramatic, and that's what entities like of that kind. They love that stuff. I'm not going to go there with them. I'm going to work with him on the hook. Where's the wound? Once we work with that, by the time I get back to the entity, it's like a leech. It has nothing to hold on to. So I'm like, thank you for showing up, move over. And so we start to go into his core stuff. When we get into his core wounds, he goes right into a past life as a young child being raised in royalty, Leo, right? And he's, you know, typical in aristocracy, when you're raised in aristocracy or royalty or whatever, his parents were fairly absent. They were too busy running the kingdom or whatever fiefdom they were running. And so he was raised by others. We quickly went through the story and found out that he became a tyrant himself, very cold-hearted. He was very cold-hearted. And again, we've got a Pluto in Cancer in the 10th house, right? So you've got repressed, that lunar inner child, repressed, condensed, you know? And then you've got this in the 11th house, you've got the a trauma signature there. A fragmentation of the heart, the joy, all of that stuff. When we went back, so again, we went very quickly through the story, and you know, it was one of those kind of Shakespearean stories. By the time he was 14, he murdered his father to take power, and he just was cold and ruthless that whole life. Very Scorpio South Node, right? He's Scorpio, yeah, Scorpio Taurus axis. It was just ruthless, and it was all about power. So a lot of times when we have these perpetrator lives and we are those kind of, we've become hardened for a reason. Something's happened. So I went back into the childhood of that past life. Again, his signatures would show that that's kind of a necessary thing with Pluto in Cancer in the 10th house. So I went back to his childhood in that life, and we went to some very critical scenes in that past life. And he had a nursemaid who he thought was beautiful. So he's about, I don't know, 8, 9, 10 in that past life, and she's the only one that gives him any love, because his whole upbringing, he was pampered. He was kind of Leonian pampered, but there was no nurturing, right? Pluto and Cancer in the 10th house, nothing, zipwad. And so it was this cold environment he grows up in. He's being groomed to be royal, but there's no love. And so he loves her, and he obsesses about her, Scorpio South Node. And he kind of follows her around when she's not looking, and he projects all of his, you know, his needs onto her. And one night he sees her in her bedchamber, and she's sleeping with her lover. And he goes into a violent rage. Very Scorpio, right? I mean, so he's like this 8, and it's the powerlessness. That's, again, we're going to get into this in Scorpio, power, powerlessness. He's enraged with the powerlessness, and he's this 8 or 9-year-old, and he doesn't know what to do with this. He's heartbroken. He's shattered. His only source of love has betrayed him, right? And he doesn't know what to do, and he's just kind of roaming around the castle, and he finds this cat, and he just strangles this cat. And pretty much that was where he snapped, okay? And then he just grew up, and then he was just like he lost his heart. He lost his heart, right? And then the rest of the story, we know what happened. He grew up, he killed his own father, he seized power, and he was actually stabbed through the heart on the battlefield later in that life. That's how he died, right through the heart. So very literal heart wounds, literal and metaphoric. Working with him, of course, the main thing we needed to do was an inner child soul retrieval for that past life self. And it was to restore that child self to joy, right? And that's the empowerment of that. So now, I worked with him on that, and I'm just going to very quickly run through the other stuff. I think it was, what was interesting is the other case that I showed you of the Pluto Libra in the Cancer, in the last Cancer case. She was in my waiting room when he came out of that session. She was very intuitive. And he walked down the stairs, and she was in the waiting room waiting for it, and he walked out, and she said to me, "What kind of ruler was he?" He had that aura about him, right? That he was just like, you know, very kind of King Lear, right? I mean, you know, she knew nothing about it. He just walked by her, and she was like, "Wow, what kind of ruler was he?" She was right on. So I regressed him in another memory. He went and he said, he went right into a present life memory, but he was only an infant. And he said, "I'm on a kraal." And in South Africa, there are the houses, the huts that they live in. And he's a little child, and he has a Zulu nurse maid. Milk, he's taking her milk. Like, he wasn't even suckled by his own mother. He had a wet nurse. And he has this Zulu nursemaid. And again, it's a little bit of the fascination of the child, like the child self from that past life, right? It's like he kind of is like, as this little infant, like looking to her for love. Well, the interesting thing is what came up in this present life memory that he didn't know was that he died there. His heart stopped, and he died. And the Zulu woman who was his nursemaid was a medicine woman. And she conjured this snake and put this snake into him, right? Now, it was one of the two snakes that we came up with in the beginning, right, that he felt the snake come into him and bring his life back. It was one of the two, because in the beginning when I worked, we identified there's two snakes there. One doesn't seem to be so bad. Other one's gritty, toothy guy. We don't like him so much, right? That's what we had identified in the very beginning. So what we found out through that session was that this woman saved his life with magic, Scorpio Taurus, right? She put this other, and that other snake was fine. The thing that was so cathartic for him was to reconnect with her. And we found out when I was working with him that she had passed on and she was now in the spirit world. And she came to him, and that guy bawled like a baby in my arms. I mean, his whole heart was just so filled with this need for love and nurturing and this Zulu nanny, and realizing that she saved his life, and he never knew that. He never knew that. And so she came in spirit form, and he just bawled and bawled and bawled. And it was so cathartic for him. It was such a return. So it was just like a reflection of his past life. That child needed to return his joy in his heart. And it was his current life infant self also that carried that wound. So then, by the time we got to Grinny, by now he's empowered. And like I said, this, if you call it demonic or this other entity that was attached to him, this non-human entity, by now it doesn't have any power. So I addressed it, and he said to Grinny Toothy One, "I don't need you anymore." Right? And he said, "Grinny Toothy One has been with me, and it's kept me from relationship. And I've hated people, and I've hated them through this snake." And it was so easy to release that entity then, you know? So just, again, that's kind of the Scorpio Taurus side of this, where those other layers of spirit interference come in that are attached to our own karmic wounds. Questions?
Did he know he had entities
No.
in him?
No.
No.
No, that wasn't in his belief system, but it was after he got up off the mat. I mean, I wasn't looking for it either. It just came out.
It's just more a comment. You can see how this would happen. The Saturn is the only planet down in the lower part of the chart.
Yes.
In the 4th house.
Yes.
And retrograde.
Yeah.
You know, it's very sad. He's so dissociated. He's
Yeah.
living all in that upper world.
Right.
With that sort of big God complex.
Yeah.
Sun, Jupiter, Pluto, and the part of fortune all up in the 10th house. With all the regality, but nothing to support it in
Yeah.
the real world. And so then that makes sense that Venus would be where it is in Leo in the 11th house, dissociated and square the nodes.
Right.
You know?
Right.
It's pretty sad, actually.
Yeah, and if you like you're saying, his only foundation to stand on is this very repressed, needy self. You know, cold and, yeah.
Well, I see some very, that 8th house having Mars in Taurus and the North Node, that's some grounded psychological magic depth to that guy.
Yeah.
I mean, it's there.
Yeah.
Whether
Yeah.
he can finds a way to access it through the other energy, but the potential is there.
He had some real power.
Yeah.
He did. He was accomplished in his, affluent and so on. In his current life, he had some real power. Yes.
I always find it confusing when the North and South Node are in opposite house. and
paradox,
sign.
yeah.
Yeah, my dad has that, and I've been trying to figure it out for him for quite
It's
some time.
because it's a paradox.
I mean, I get caught up in it. How do you get out of this?
Yeah, well, that's exactly what's going on inside them. How do I get out of this? And again, they'll turn up. It's kind of like having the nodes squared, thinking of it as that kind of quandary. Both of those archetypes that are represented have not been integrated smoothly. So they're actually still working on both sides, trying to bring them to some resolutions before they can access, the polarity point of the North Node.
So what do you see? What do you see in the past life reality? According to the South Node, then, how do you communicate?
Read it as
that?
both.
Read it as both.
Yeah, so I would say he's had very Taurus, Scorpio past lives, both. Yeah. And they're not integrated yet. They're still both wounded, they're still both so he's still kind of working on it. I mean, and then of course the karmic signature is more complex because you got the Pluto you bring in and the square to the nodes and so on. Right. Yes.
So any planet in the 11th house is subject to being fractured or
Fragmentation.
fragmentation.
Yes.
Okay.
Any planet in the 11th is what she's saying. Fragmentation, yeah. Okay. So other Leo stuff, I think Kim Marie said something about it too. There's also those artist lives. I've had a lot of child prodigies with Leo signatures in past lives. I've also got a case of that in my book, what the kind of the pain of the child prodigy. I've also a lot of those starving artists' past lives with Leo signatures. Kim Marie mentioned that this morning, so I don't need to belabor that. But just to round off Leo. Remember our movement from this morning? Right? That's our Leo.
Another thing as far as trauma, like a lot of Leo signature, if it comes from royalty, long time ago within the royalty, they stayed in the family and there was a lot of incest within the
Yes,
family.
yeah. Yeah, so she's saying Leo royalty stayed in the family, incest in the family. Yeah. Yeah, well, that's that. What's the Shakespeare? Sleeping with the mother and killing the father. Hamlet, right? Yeah. I mean, that's what his past life was like. I'm like, oh my God, it's so Leo, so dramatic. Okay, so we've had some talk. You had some talk from Kim Marie and Mark about Virgo, and how when we move out of the kind of fullness of Leo and self-creative self-actualization and all that, that you then move into a deflation. So in psychological languages, you can also see that they're kind of the same spectrum. You know, inflation is a wounded ego as much as deflation is a wounded ego, right? Neither one of them are in healthy balance. So somewhere there's, you know, if you're working with an empowered Leo archetype, I mean, I guess you can say, you know when you're in the empowered Leo archetype when, well, what Mark was saying is when you're special, but who wants to be that special because everybody's special? But when you are in the space of just in the joy of your own creativity, and that you love the joy of other people's creativity, and that it's just such a cool thing that we're all doing that, that's empowered Leo, right? Because it's like, yeah. You know, I shine, you shine, we all shine. Isn't that cool? Right? That's a very empowered Leo place. It isn't about, you know, competitive or me or you or this or that. So when you get into Virgo, there's this kind of drawing in of oneself. It's a purification archetype. You know, it's a preparatory archetype. One of the key, and I'm a Pluto Virgo in the 6th house, so I could just sit here and tell you all my past lives, right? That all, you know, have to do with all of these kind of Virgo signatures. And, you know, I could say one theme of mine that came up in many past lives was kind of apprenticing and getting ready to come out. And then just when you're about to come out, something happens. Right? And so that it carries into this current life of this anxiety, right? About, you know, and I have a Leo North Node in the 5th, so I'm supposed to be doing this, right? But every time you step into that, for me, step into that Leo North Node in the 5th, it's like all of that Pluto and Virgo in the 6th kicks in, right? And it was those distant past life memories of, well, every time I prepared something and I was just about to come out, you know, I got killed, I got raped, I got tortured, I got this, I got that, right? So why do that again? Like, who wants to even do that? Fortunately, I'm over that now. I know. And writing the book was where I had to undo all of those. That was the trigger for me. Yes?
I'm just curious, in the data, first data, Brentwood,
Oh, England, UK.
England, okay.
Yes, Brentwood, UK.
Okay.
So, Virgo. So we had preparation and apprenticing, and there's those kinds of past lives, very literal, getting ready to do something and or something goes wrong when you come out. And so that carries forward into current life as this anxiety about coming out, this anxiety about, you know, putting something out there. I'm just going to go through some of the imprints quickly. Service and servitude. We know that Virgo is associated with that. I've had more than my fair share of burnt-out Civil War surgeons and nurses, right, that have Virgo signatures, right, past lives. More than my share of those. They're just burnt out from serving, right? A lot of nuns, a lot of, you know, people that have been in service in past lives, and the, you know, the problems that come with that. She's got some of that. We're going to see that in this case, a little bit of some of that. You know, it also is associated, the Virgo-Pisces axis is associated, we know, with Christianity. So there's very few people that have a 6th, 12th house axis on their karmic 6th, 12th, or Virgo-Pisces that have not tangled with Christianity in one way or another in their past lives. You're going to find that theme. And that's either from within the structure of the church or having been persecuted by the church or whatever. You're definitely going to find that. The other thing that we were talking about, somebody was talking about, was this guilt atonement. Mark talked extensively about it, so I'm not going to get into it too much. But, you know, it is true. Virgo is an archetype of, it's yin, it turns in, it's the, you know, the Mercury side is an internal. It's not like the Gemini Mercury that's external and yang. This is an internal Mercury. So there's assimilation, and we know that, you know, Virgo rules the colon, and so there's part of digestion that's going on there. It's part of assimilation. It's, and what a lot of Virgo, when people have a lot of Virgo energy, what a lot of them don't realize is exactly how much of the external world that they are interjecting in an attempt to purify and change it. And this is where the higher form of Virgo needs to be worked on, and it's often part of the karmic lesson for Virgo when it's in the karmic axis, is discernment. And discernment isn't just about discerning this, you know, like separating the wheat from the chaff, right, which is a very Virgo image, right, the wheat goddess. It's not just about that. It's about separating out what belongs to me and what doesn't belong to me. And what people, a lot of Virgo people, very Pluto Virgo, unconsciously are drawing in all the toxins from their environment, because Virgo is this archetype of taking things in, holding it. You know, it's the pregnant virgin. She's not ready to give birth yet. She's gestating. Something within her is perfecting. It has yet to be born. Right? So it's this archetype of taking in and gestating, and, you know, still, and it's in that process of just getting ready to, right? Again, like I was talking about preparation. So when people, especially the Pluto Virgo people or Pluto 6th house people, that's a double signature of assimilation, because Scorpio is an archetype also of digestion and assimilation. It's this taking in the impurities from the environment and through oneself trying to purify it, which often doesn't work. We've got enough of our own shit to work on. You don't need to take on everything else. And so part of the discernment often has to happen of what belongs to me and what doesn't. And sometimes that is getting back to, if you remember the case I showed you before, in the Cancer, she had the sun and, was it Neptune square the nodes in the 6th house, and she had internalized mother's poisonous message, right? Scorpio squaring the nodes in the 6th house of you are nobody special, right? So there's a necessary need for her to separate out what she's introjected. It's the same for all of us with Virgo signatures.
With that Neptune there, which makes everything so porous.
Yes.
You know, right on the south node, so besides that disillusionment and everything, but that porousness of Neptune absorbing.
Yeah,
so
with
much.
her, sure. Yeah, for sure. So this woman is a woman who came to me. She's a businesswoman, and she was in corporate America. And she was saying, you know, people are always coming, and we were talking about this yesterday, people are always coming to me, talking to me about their problems. And, you know, when I was talking about it, I'm like, yeah, I dig that. You know, I'm like Pluto Virgo. It's like, that's my service. I think that's cool, right? I like that. She hates it. She's like, because it was kicking up all of this 10th house stuff where she was feeling responsible and overwhelmed. Right? So she's going into, so somewhere in her, there's this overwhelmed character, kind of like, you know, your surgeon on the battlefield in the Civil War kind of energy, right? I'm burnt out, I can't take it anymore. So she has what I call the reluctant healer signature, right? Virgo Pisces is often associated with natural healing, right? It's that mind-body-spirit connection. Virgo Pisces can be. And quite frequently, you know, in our generation, a lot of the healers that were the old herbalists before, and a lot of the witches and those that were accused of that kind of stuff, Virgo Pisces axis, persecuted for those kind of natural ways, those natural forms of healing. It shows up a lot on that axis. So, you know, you find that a lot in Virgo Pisces. So she's like, she hates that these people are always coming to her and telling her problems. She doesn't, and it kind of puts her into this, again, overwhelmed state of responsibility. So we go to work on it, and she goes into this past life of a young woman who's very psychic, Pisces and Scorpio, and Neptune conjunct the south node. She's naturally psychic, and she has an ability to scan and see illness. She saw mental pictures of illness in this past life. And she was in some kind of gypsy culture, right? And so she has an older woman who's her mentor, and she's learning. It's like kind of really a normal form of learning. She's an apprentice, right? Virgo. She's an apprentice. This older woman is nurturing her and guiding her in her natural abilities. And one day the woman needs to go and travel and do some work somewhere else, some healing, and leaves her with all of the herbs and says, you know, you take care of the community for a while I'm gone. Well, she was feeling unprepared. Very Virgo. I'm not ready, right? That's like the cry of Virgo. If only I study a little bit more, right? So she was in that kind of like, you know, and in the 4th house, mommy, don't leave me, right? So she had all these insecurities, right? All the doubts and the anxieties, very Virgo, about the woman leaving. And the woman was like, you're fine. You have spiritual guidance. That's what she said to her. You know, you're well established. We've connected. We made that connection. You've got your guides. Don't worry about it, I'm not going to be gone long. Now, I've seen stories like that before, and quite frequently what happens in those kinds of stories, not always, but sometimes some plague breaks out or, you know, something, and the person goes into just absolute frenzy, right? Like the Civil War surgeon. Just too much, can't handle it. Well, in her case, what was interesting was nothing like that happened, except that she internally worked herself into a froth. Right? So here's the nature of all those insecurities. And she started breaking out in hives in this past life, and she's like picking at herself. I mean, this is so like, you know, Virgo, nervousness, like this, and she's fretting, and I can't handle it, and what am I going to do? And, you know, again, there's this, you know, overwhelm, right? And the 10th house responsibility, and I can't handle it, and what am I going to do? And da-da-da. And so she tries to, and you know, we know this. When you're in a state of anxiety and so on, and you're screaming to your guides, you often don't hear what they're saying, right? Because we're like, so she wasn't really connecting with her spiritual guidance in the past life, so she decided, very Scorpio Taurus, that she was going to do some magic to bring in some better guides, because they weren't good enough, right? Yeah, right. Yeah, not good enough, right? She said, yeah, they're not good enough. I need somebody more powerful, Scorpio. I need somebody more powerful. So she does this, you know, thing, and some entities come in, and they're very powerful, but yeah, not so nice. And fortunately, she's got Jupiter here, you know, this nice, again, we were talking about this Jupiter grace signature. Fortunately, she's got this nice little Jupiter grace signature because what happened was that her teacher did come back, and this entity had possessed her in the past life, but she, her teacher and some of the other able-bodied healers in the community were able to release her from the grasp of it. Now, part of the karma, so what she said after that, so after fortunately they depossessed her, I didn't have to. It happened in the past life. The entity was not still with her because she had able healers in the past that did it. So what happened when we went through that memory and they took this entity out of her, and she said, never again. I'm never going to do that. And this actually brings in a little bit of the Gemini, because what I didn't say when I was talking about the Gemini archetype is sometimes the wound in the Gemini archetype are the vows that we spoke, or when we made those kinds of verbal or written contracts. And in her case, she said, never, I'm never going to do healing, never. And she became a basket weaver in that life, raised kids, that was it. She didn't want to know anything about it, right? Well, obviously, the universe was still pushing the envelope with her, right? Because first thing, it wanted her to revisit that never again statement. And my own healer, my own shamanic healer said this to me years ago. She said, don't ever say never to the universe, because it will challenge you on that, right? Never say never, right? It might be like, maybe I'm going to opt out of that in this lifetime, but don't ever say never. And she was right. So this woman here is, you know, basically has made that statement to the universe, and it's not, you know, it's not punishing her, but it's just basically saying, this is an unintegrated, she is a natural healer, right? She has that capacity, but she's disowned it. So when we worked with her after in the past life, part of the healing for her was to reconnect with the simplicity and the magic that she knew before she went into all the anxiety. When the healing was in ease, when it was a natural gift that was flowing through her. And, you know, when you see that, there's this Pluto, the polarity point is Pisces, right? So there's that part of her that needed to kind of trust and surrender again. Yes, the 10th house, she had to take responsibility for the vow that she made. And also what she saw as misuse of power, right? She had misused magical power in the past. That's how she felt. The universe didn't judge her on it, but she felt that way. It was guilt, again, internalized guilt. So we had to resolve all those things in the afterlife, which we did. You know, and then afterwards when we were talking about, and it was also this, again, here's the signature again. So she's got a nice little Taurus North Node in the 12th, right? Which is again about just being the simplicity and surrender, right? Kind of like what her teachers had said to her when she left, don't worry, you've got guidance. It was getting back to that. So when she re-empowered that in her after the session, she sat up and she said, well, you know, I didn't tell you before, but I am actually really quite psychic. And, oh, really? And she said, you know, I've never really done anything with it. And I'm like, well, now we know why. So, you know, what are you going to do about that now, right? So that she could have a healthier relationship with that part of herself. Yeah. Questions?
I'm going to ask you a question because you know the Gemini archetype and the Sagittarius archetype. And the whole thing about a vow, the thing about that axis, the Gemini-Sagittarius axis, Gemini gathers information, right?
Yes.
And Sagittarius wants to find the higher truth and make a belief out of it, make a religion out of it, make a vow to it. And it's just natural for Gemini to say, I am not going to make a vow to one thing. I'm here to gather information, to integrate, you know, to be perceptive about what it is. So I was wondering if you had any comment about that axis, that Gemini Sagittarius, and where's that meet? Where do they meet?
Well, I don't know if I understand. I only know that understand your specific question. I only know from my experience, again, looking at the archetypes from past life perspective, that in Gemini, it is often the spoken word, the spoken vow, the written word. Sometimes I have people rip up contracts. You know, you make monastic vows. Vows of poverty, it almost always relates back to Gemini. In my book, I have a case of a guy whose wife died in his arms, and he said, he was trying to save her life, and he said, I will never leave you. I'll always be there for you. And in this life, he was married to her, and they were trying to break up for like 20 years, and he could not get out of the relationship. And it went back to several lifetimes where he made this spoken vow, and it was very Gemini. So I do find that often with the Gemini thing. It's this very, you know, because Gemini can be a very literal energy. It's the spoken word. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but...
Yeah, I haven't thought of it that way. I think of Sagittarius more as the spoken word.
Ah, no. Yeah, it doesn't show up that way usually, and just in past life perspective, yeah. Any Virgo thoughts? Analysis? Are you digesting?
When you do sessions, Patricia, how many regressions do you do per session? Because you talk about, I regressed them several times. Is
Well,
this...
I see clients, some clients I only see once and then they're off on their way, and maybe I see them a year or two later or something. I don't do, you know, a standard like people come every week, but because, you know, I do travel around and I have little pockets of clients, so I do concentrate. So maybe like I'll go to Vancouver and I'll see a load of clients and then I won't come back for 6 months, but then I'll see them again. But I also have people travel to see me, or local people, and they'll work with me more regularly.
How many sessions can an individual go through without just total exhaustion?
Well, I've done a couple hundred myself.
No, I mean, if
I mean, on my own stuff.
no, I mean, if I were to come to you.
Oh, I see.
And I traveled a long distance, would you try to take me into?
Over 2 days, 2 to 3.
Okay.
That's
thank
about
you.
it. Yeah. Yeah. Usually you could do like 2 on one day and 1 on the final day, and then we'll do some integration. I mean, I also do a lot of integration exercises and things, or even just talking about those imprints. But I mean, when we do professional trainings, you do 2 regressions and give 2 regressions in the course of 5 days. So, you know, the psyche can handle that. Yeah.
Being, you know, the Virgo being a signature, somebody being a healer in the past life, is there also a repeated theme of chronic illness that would show up as well?
Illness, yes. Yes, it can be. Yep. Yeah, I've seen that before, for sure. Hypochondria, yeah. Well, what is hypochondria, really? I mean, you know, when there's a kind of cross between energetic, is it really, it's like you know, in one of Mark's cases that he had up, and he was talking about the bipolar guy. You know, I'm looking at that, and the guy's got the axis on the 2nd, 8th house, and he was talking about being possessed. Is that mental illness or is that spirit possession? Right? So it's a cross of languages, right? So we have a clinical model that says hypochondria, but maybe in the shamanic energetic picture, you know, it's a bleed through from some other time or place or something that, you know, may not be manifesting in the physical body yet, but it's in the energetic bodies, and you can deal with it out there, you know? Yeah. Yeah, I had one woman, I'm trying to remember, I think she was a Pluto Virgo in the 8th house, and she was caring for everybody in a plague. I mean, it was so like, you know, 8th house's plague and all that, right? And it was all this about the illness and the germs and the everybody's dying, and it was Armageddon, and yeah. Yes.
So if you just saw this chart of a person, because the Uranus is in Virgo,
Yes. Exact, right?
So wherever Uranus, whatever sign it's in, there's likely some trauma, fragmentation in that sign or house.
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, with her, it's part of the karmic axis because it's conjunct Pluto. I mean, in her case, in that one story, in her case, it showed up as this kind of, it exacerbated the Virgo mental energy, right? Because, you know, it's Aquarius, Uranus, and it was all, it was all mind. It was all in her mind, like you said, right? It was the imagined sense of responsibility and whatever was all in the nervous system and the mind. So you could say in that story, that's how that manifested.